Stop. For a moment, stop. Set down the noise. Step away from the scrolling, the messages, the unfinished thoughts, the small distractions pretending to be urgent. What is opening above you right now is not the kind of window that waits politely. It is not measured in seasons. It is not measured in months. It is not even measured in days. This one is measured in hours. By this time, tomorrow, Friday, March 15, Mars will arrive at 8 degrees and 55 minutes of Pisces, closing in on the North Node with a precision so narrow it almost feels surgical. Just 19 arc minutes. In sky language, that is not an approximation. That is not close enough. That is impact. Exact enough to matter. Tight enough to leave a mark. And this is where the room changes. Because this is not some casual transit passing through the background of your life. This exact arrangement, at this exact point in Pisces, reaches back more than 180 years. The last time the heavens formed this pattern, the year was 1840. Different century, different streets, different names in power, and yet the same sky, holding the same angle, returning now like a key sliding back into an ancient lock. Something long, dormant, stirs when a pattern like this comes back online. Something that has been waiting beneath the surface of history and beneath the surface of you. Not dead, not gone, waiting, coiled, preserved in silence. And tomorrow, it moves. Now understand what makes this heavier than a rare astronomical moment. Mars is not just a planet drifting over a symbolic point. Mars is pressure. Mars is ignition. Mars is the force in the psyche that stops negotiating and starts choosing. In every old world language of symbol and myth, Mars was never merely movement, it was directed movement. It was iron, blood, will, heat. The part of you that cuts through hesitation and makes reality answer. And the North Node is not decoration. It is not a pretty concept for spiritual people to romanticize. It is the place where direction becomes costly, where destiny stops being abstract and starts asking for embodiment. If Mars is the striking force, then the node is the surface that receives it, the shaping place, the place where the future stops floating in theory and enters form. When the striking force meets the shaping point at the right moment, one action can change the architecture of a life. Too soon, and nothing gives. Too late, and the opening is gone. But at the exact threshold, the live threshold, even one clean decision can bend the next chapter into a different shape. That is what tomorrow carries. Not vague potential. Not inspiration for later. A strike point. So here is the only question that matters now, and it is sharper than comfort. When the pressure lands, what will you choose? Not what you daydream about. Not what you keep postponing with elegant explanations. Not the answer you rehearse to sound wise. What decision will you actually make when reality asks for your name on it? Because that is what this window is for. Not endless reflection. Not one more delay. A decision. And whether you are ready or not, the sky is moving like something expects an answer. Stay with this. Do not drift off now. Because before this is over, the shape of the choice in front of you will stop being vague. It will stop hiding behind mood, behind confusion, behind the elegant delay tactics your mind has been dressing up as caution. By the end of this, you will know what the decision is. More than that, you will understand why your body has been leaning toward it, long before your thoughts were brave enough to admit it. There are moments in history when human beings understood that a threshold had been reached before logic could fully explain it. Long before modern people reduced destiny to productivity, long before every instinct was interrupted by noise, there were cultures that knew a decision had weight before action ever arrived. They knew that the real turning point does not happen when the world sees you move. It happens earlier, in the silent instant when something inside you crosses a line and cannot uncross it. The Romans understood this in a way the modern mind has almost forgotten. Not the polished Rome of textbooks and marble nostalgia, but the harder Rome, the one that lived by vow, by omen, by threshold, by the invisible gravity of what was spoken before it was done. They had a face of Mars that is rarely remembered now. Not only the public god of warfare, banners, conquest, and blood, but an older current beneath that image. Mars as forward motion itself. Mars as the force that leaves the gate. Mars as the one who does not circle the same fear forever. The one who crosses before soldiers marched beyond the city's edge, before the dust of the road rose around their legs, before the first clash of steel, there was a vow. And what mattered most about that vow was not its drama. It was its timing. The oath was made before the outcome could be known, before loss had a face, before pain had a cost, before the road proved anything. It was spoken while the body was still protected, and the mind still had 100 clever ways to justify staying where it was. That is always where the true test begins. Not when life corners you, not when there is no other option, not when the bridge is already burning behind you. It begins while retreat is still available. It begins while your excuses still sound intelligent. It begins while comfort is still close enough to call itself wisdom. That is the kind of threshold opening now. This is why what is forming in your sky is not, at its deepest level, about conflict. It is about declaration. Mars at this degree is not demanding that you attack. It is demanding that you stop withholding your own direction from yourself. It is asking you to name the road you already know you are standing in front of. To say it clearly, to stop calling uncertainty mystery, when much of it is simply your resistance to hearing your own truth in a voice that cannot be taken back. And yes, the road ahead is not fully lit. It was never going to be, because this alignment unfolds in Pisces, and Pisces does not deal in sharp edges and bright fluorescent certainty. Pisces works another way. It does not hand you a map with every turn labeled. It does not flood the landscape with proof. It gives you atmosphere. It gives you undertow. It gives you symbols, bodily knowing, a strange ache of recognition, a pull you cannot entirely defend in rational terms. It gives you the dim line of light on the far horizon and asks whether you trust it enough to move before the whole sky explains itself. That is precisely why Mars here is so misunderstood. Mars in a fire sign is easy for people to recognize. It looks like momentum. It looks like visible hunger. It looks like a door kicked open. But Mars in Pisces is the kind of force that makes no announcement. It enters quietly and starts changing the shape of things from underneath. It is not less powerful. It is more concealed, more tidal, more intimate. It works through intuition, timing, symbolic pressure, emotional truth, and a kind of action that begins in the unseen long before it takes outer form. Mars entered Pisces on March 3 and remains there until April 9. That matters, because what happens when fire enters water is not extinction. It is transformation. The warrior does not disappear in the sea. The warrior learns another grammar of strength. Less blunt force, more inevitability, less noise, more consequence. Picture a river at the bend, where, from a distance, everything looks deceptively calm. The surface smooths out, the eye relaxes. You could mistake it for stillness if you only looked quickly. But anyone who understands water knows the bend is where the current becomes most exacting. It is where pressure gathers, where earth is quietly carried away grain by grain, where the banks lose their former shape and the land is rewritten without fanfare. That is Mars in Pisces. It does not resemble action in the way your culture taught you to recognize action. It may even feel, at first, like a reduction in force, a lowering, a softening, a slowing down of the familiar engine. And if you have felt that recently, if the old sharp drive has gone muted, if your usual style of pushing has receded, if something quieter but more penetrating has taken its place, do not misread that shift as weakness. The river is not weak at the bend. It is doing its deepest work there. It is carving. It is removing what cannot remain. It is deciding the future shape of the shore. So when Mars reaches this exact point and meets the North Node, what is touched is not some decorative spiritual idea. It is the place where direction becomes irreversible, the place where your life stops asking what sounds meaningful and starts asking what you are actually willing to embody. This is where the future stops being a fantasy you visit when you are tired of the present. This is where it begins, asking for structure, cost, honesty, and form. Not the future other people projected onto you. Not the future fear has been rehearsing in the middle of the night. Not the future built out of old survival patterns dressed up as common sense. The deeper one. The one that has been pressing at the edges of your life for longer than you want to admit. The one your body has recognized in flashes through tension, through longing, through the sudden return of memory, through the exhaustion that comes from continuing to live against your own current. The one that did not begin when you became conscious of it. The one that was there before language caught up, before identity caught up, before your public self figured out what your deeper self had already signed. That is the future being activated here. Not predicted, not fantasized. Forged. And the forged does not ask for perfect certainty. It asks for truth. The clean truth. The costly truth. The truth without performance wrapped around it. So, stay close now. Because this is not just a passing mood in the sky. This is a live threshold. And when a threshold like this opens, the only thing more dangerous than moving too fast is pretending you still do not know which way your life is trying to go. Now widen your focus, because if you only look at tomorrow, you will miss the architecture of what is actually happening. Most people will talk about this as if it were one isolated transit, one dramatic peak, one moment to notice, and then move on from. That is not what this is. This is not a single note struck in an empty room. This is a sequence, a timed progression, a pressure system moving in order, one motion preparing the next, one threshold unlocking another. What you are standing inside is not a random flare of symbolism. It is a 5-day corridor with 3 distinct impacts, all landing on the same inner structure. 3 impacts, 5 days, 1 shaping force. And if you have felt strange this week, more alert, more tender, more pulled inward and forward at the same time, it is because part of you has already recognized the pattern before your conscious mind found language for it. The first movement began on March 11. That was the day Jupiter turned direct in Cancer after months of moving backward through its own review. Do not underestimate that reversal. When Jupiter changes direction, something in the field of meaning changes with it. Jupiter is not a minor current. It governs expansion, trust, scale, interpretation, the ability to see beyond the narrow room your fear has been trying to lock you inside. It is the part of the psyche that says life can still grow from here, that the next chapter is not condemned to repeat the last one, that there is still room for increase, for coherence, for a larger horizon than the one you've been bracing against. But for months, that current had been turned inward, not gone, inward, reviewing, reassessing, pulling meaning back through the body, reworking what you believed was possible, quietly testing which hopes were still alive and which ones had been inflated beyond truth. Jupiter retrograde does not usually collapse the future. It interrogates it. It asks whether your vision is real enough to carry weight, whether your growth has roots, whether what you call expansion is actually aligned or just an escape route dressed in spiritual language. So when Jupiter stationed direct on the 11th, something released. Maybe not with fireworks, maybe not in a way you could post about or explain cleanly, but something released. A pressure valve opened. A deep emotional brace that had been held for too long loosened its grip. Some people felt it as relief. Some felt it as grief. Some felt it as the odd sensation of space returning to the chest after months of living internally compressed. As if something that had been sitting on the sternum finally shifted its weight. That was the first movement, not the decision itself. The opening before the decision. The part where the locked room gets air again. Jupiter moved first because meaning had to be restored before action could become clean. Your inner world had to remember that forward motion was still possible. The emotional ground had to soften. The future had to become believable again, not in a grandiose way, not in a fantasy way, but in a way the nervous system could actually tolerate. Then comes the second movement, and this is the one that changes shape. Tomorrow, Mars reaches the node. This is where opening becomes impact, where possibility stops hovering in the abstract and begins moving toward embodiment. Everything Jupiter loosened 2 days earlier now meets force, will, heat, direction. Mars does not philosophize. Mars does not hold a panel discussion with your hesitation. Mars moves. Mars cuts. Mars commits energy to form. And when that force meets the north node, the point of directional pull, karmic alignment, futureward demand, something stops being a concept and starts becoming a choice. This is why tomorrow does not feel mental. It feels bodily. You will not only think it, you will feel it. In your pulse, in your hands, in the restlessness beneath stillness, in the strange immediacy of a truth that has been waiting too long to be named. Because this second movement is not about insight for its own sake. It is about the moment when insight demands a vessel. Jupiter opened the chamber. Mars strikes the metal. And when the strike lands, the body knows before the personality finishes narrating the event. That is why so many people under a transit like this say, "I suddenly knew." Not because new information arrived out of nowhere, but because force met readiness. Because what had been circling finally found a point of entry. This is the shaping blow. The moment where a direction begins to take on consequence. The moment where your life starts asking not what sounds beautiful, but what becomes real once you commit your energy to it. And then comes the third movement. March 15. Mercury retrograde reaches Mars at the same degree in Pisces. Now this is where the pattern becomes almost unnervingly precise. Because Mercury is not force. Mercury is articulation. It is language, cognition, naming, message, meaning carried by words. If Mars is the act, Mercury is the sentence that reveals what the act actually meant. If Mars is the strike, Mercury is the inscription. If Mars is the vow in the blood, Mercury is the moment the vow becomes audible enough to be remembered. But Mercury is retrograde here. And that matters, because retrograde Mercury does not simply push forward. It returns. It revisits. It hears again. It doubles back. Not always to reverse, but to understand. To decode. To catch what was said too quickly the first time. To expose the truth hidden inside the original utterance. So when Mercury meets Mars after the strike, the purpose is not cancellation. It is revelation. Not undoing, not retreat, not maybe I didn't mean it. No, something subtler, more exacting. You hear your own decision more clearly. You understand what your mouth said before your defenses could soften it. You realize that the sentence you spoke carried more truth than your comfort level wanted to allow. You see that the action was not impulsive after all, it was overdue. This is why the third movement can feel eerie. By then, the bell has already been struck. The air is already vibrating. You cannot pretend the moment never happened. What Mercury does is make you listen to the sound all the way through. It lets you hear the overtones. It asks, do you understand what you have actually set in motion? And for many people, that is the real sobering point, not the action itself, but the clarity that follows it. So, understand the order here. First, Jupiter restores expansion from the inside. Then Mars converts pressure into decisive force. Then Mercury returns to read the meaning etched into the moment. Opening, impact, interpretation. Or, if you want it in simpler terms, the chest unlocks, the hand moves, the voice understands. That is the pattern. And from a distance, someone might call this coincidence. A cluster of transits. A dramatic week. Interesting timing. But from inside the lived reality of it, it feels different. It feels arranged. Not in a sentimental way. Not in the cheap language people use when they want everything to sound magical. More severe than that. More exact. It feels timed, as if the sky is not merely displaying symbols, but applying sequence. As if one mechanism has been engaged to trigger the next. As if the week itself has been engineered to move you from emotional release to committed action, to unmistakable self-recognition. That is why this 5-day corridor matters more than most people realize. It is not loud in the obvious sense. It is precise. It is surgical. It is targeted. And when a window like this opens, the danger is not only in missing it. The greater danger is reducing it to inspiration when it is actually instruction. Reducing it to mood when it is actually momentum. Reducing it to a beautiful idea when it is actually a demand for alignment. So no, this is not one event. It is a progression. And you are already inside it. By the time most people realize what happened, the sequence will already be imprinting itself into their choices, their bodies, their conversations, their thresholds, their timing. But you do not have to wait for hindsight. You can meet it while it is live. You can recognize the pattern while the metal is still warm. 3 impacts. 5 days. 1 inner anvil. And if you have the feeling that this week has been aimed at you with unusual precision, trust that feeling. Because some periods in life are diffuse, and some are exact. This one is exact. Now come closer. Closer than analysis. Closer than astrology charts, symbols, degrees, and theories. Bring your attention beneath interpretation and into the one place that has been telling the truth the entire time. Your body. Because your body noticed this before your mind agreed to notice it. That is one of the oldest laws of any real threshold. The nervous system hears the drum before the intellect names the song. The skin registers the weather before the forecast is printed. And when a life-changing decision is drawing near, the body rarely waits for permission from the rational mind. It begins preparing in advance. Quietly. Precisely. Sometimes so subtly you could miss it if you were not paying attention. But once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. So start with your hands. Not metaphorically. Literally. Your hands. Have they felt different lately? Warmer, maybe, for no practical reason? A low heat in the palms when you have not been exerting yourself. A current in the fingertips. A slight agitation, almost electrical. As if your hands are waiting for an instruction your conscious mind has not fully received yet. Not panic. Not jitters. Something more directed than that. A readiness without an object. Pay attention to that. Hands are never neutral at a threshold. Hands are where decision leaves the invisible world and enters matter. Hands sign what the mouth has delayed. Hands reach, release, open, close, build, end, begin. Hands turn the knob. Send the message. Pack the bag. Touch the shoulder. Plea. Pull the truth into form. When the hands begin to warm before the act, it is often because the body already knows it is close to converting inner knowledge into outer movement. Something in you is nearing a point of contact. That is why the energy gathers there first. Now move to your sleep, or more precisely, to the hour before dawn. Have you been waking in that narrow band between night and morning around 4, maybe 5 abruptly, almost completely, as though something inside you rose before the rest of the world did? Not the ordinary kind of waking where you drift in and out and pull yourself back under. I mean the kind where your eyes open and you are simply there, alert, lit from within, not fully distressed, not exactly peaceful either, just awake with a strange clarity that arrives before reason. That matters, because the body has ancient ways of preparing for transition. Before the modern world turned every sensation into pathology, people understood that there are hours when the veil thins between what is ending and what is approaching. The body becomes vigilant in those hours. It does not need a calendar to know that pressure is building. It does not need a headline to sense that a field is changing. Animals know when the season is turning long before the trees are visibly different. Your body carries that same intelligence. It feels the shift in atmosphere before the personality has formed an opinion about it. So, if you have been waking before dawn with that charged stillness in your chest, do not dismiss it too quickly. Sometimes that hour is not insomnia. Sometimes it is rehearsal. Sometimes the deeper self is already standing at the doorway, while the ordinary self is still insisting there is time. And then there is the third sign. This one reaches differently. more personally, more quietly. It does not announce itself as sensation first, but as return. A person, a face, a name you had not planned to remember, someone from months ago, years ago. Maybe someone you thought had already been filed away inside the archive of your life. And yet suddenly, they are there again, crossing your mind in the middle of an otherwise ordinary day, or appearing in a dream with unusual sharpness, or arriving as a voice memory so intact it feels less like recollection and more like visitation. When that happens, notice your chest. There is often a contraction there, almost immediate. Not because you are being punished by the past, not because memory has come back to torment you, but because some part of the circuit was never closed. A thread remained active. A sentence remained unfinished. A choice was delayed, avoided, diluted, or only half made. And when a real turning point approaches, unresolved material does not always stay buried. It rises, not to derail the future, but to ask whether you are willing, finally, to finish what was left suspended. This is one of the harder truths of threshold seasons. The future often activates the past, not because you are meant to go backward, but because anything left incomplete becomes heavier at the moment you are supposed to move forward. So, if an old face has returned, do not flatten the moment into sentimentality. Ask the more difficult question: what remained open there? What truth did I stop short of speaking? What part of myself got stranded in that story? What vow? What goodbye? What no? What yes? What grief? What release never fully reached form? Sometimes the reappearance of the person is not about them at all. Sometimes they are carrying back a fragment of you. And now, the fourth sign: your breathing. Not whether you are breathing. How? Has your breath felt different these last few days? Slightly irregular in a way that doesn't fit the usual categories? One moment, broad, open, almost expansive. The next, caught high in the chest, as if some invisible hand pressed lightly against the sternum. Then open again, then held again. A kind of back and forth your body does without consulting you. That rhythm matters more than you think, because when a life is standing between two structures, the breath often reveals it before the mind admits it. One part of you is still organized around the life you have been living, the current loyalties, habits, identities, compromises, roles. Another part is already leaning toward the life that is trying to emerge. The body swings between those realities: expansion and restraint, permission and hesitation, arrival and resistance. That is not random instability. That is oscillation. And oscillation is what happens at the forge before impact. The breath becomes the bellows. It feeds the fire. It intensifies the heat required for the shaping blow. In that sense, even your unsettled breathing may be participating in the event. Not as a flaw, not as weakness, as preparation. Look at the pattern now. The hands heat up. The eyes open before dawn. The unfinished face returns. The breath changes its rhythm. 4 signals, different surfaces, same origin. None of them are meaningless. None of them are merely incidental. And none of them should be reduced too quickly to stress, overthinking, caffeine, poor sleep, or random emotional weather, at least not without first honoring the possibility that your body is doing exactly what bodies do when they are standing near a consequential threshold. It positions itself. That is what all of this is. Positioning. The body adjusting before the strike. The nervous system arranging its weight. The deeper self moving into place while the surface self still stalls for language. Your body has been taking its place in front of this moment for days now, maybe longer. It has already sensed that something is about to require honesty. Not eventually, but soon. It has already begun distributing energy to the places that will need to act, to the hands that may have to release or reach, to the chest that will have to bear the truth, to the breath that will have to carry words out of the body and into the world. And here is the part most people avoid, because it is too exact. Your body often knows the decision before your personality is willing to lose the story attached to not making it. That is why the signs appear first in sensation. Sensation bypasses performance. Sensation has no interest in sounding wise. It does not care whether the timing flatters your self-image. It only reports what is real. Heat, waking, memory, breath, signal after signal after signal. So do not underestimate what your body has already admitted. It is already at the threshold. It is already facing the anvil. It is already braced for impact. And if you have felt these signs gathering around you, then understand what that means. Some part of you is no longer waiting to discover the truth. It is waiting for you to say it out loud. What takes form after tomorrow will not be determined by the sky alone. That is the part people misunderstand when they speak about these alignments, as if destiny were something that happens to you while you stand there untouched. It is not that simple. It is not that passive. A transit can open the chamber, intensify the heat, sharpen the hour, but it does not reach into your life and choose on your behalf. It reveals, it magnifies, it puts pressure on what is already there. It takes whatever you bring to the threshold and makes it impossible to keep pretending you did not bring it. That is why this moment is not casual. Because what is about to be amplified is not theory. It is your real material. Your actual hesitation. Your true desire. Your unfinished refusal. Your half-spoken knowing. The alignment does not invent the decision. It exposes the one that has already been waiting inside you, gathering weight in the dark. So let me say the uncomfortable part plainly. You already know. Maybe not in the polished language you wish you had. Maybe not in a form you can explain to other people without sounding inconvenient, disruptive, emotional, or unreasonable. But underneath all that, you know. You have known, for longer than your surface mind wants to admit. Not for a day or two. Not because of one conversation this week. Longer. Long enough that the truth has started to press against the walls of your life from the inside. And this is the question the moment is really asking. Not, what should I do? That question is often a disguise. It sounds innocent. It sounds thoughtful. But most of the time, by the point a transit like this arrives, that is no longer the real question. The real question is more exacting than that, more honest, more exposing. The real question is, why have I not done what I already know? That is the threshold, because in most cases, the delay was never caused by a lack of information. It was not that you needed one more sign, one more podcast, one more conversation, one more journal entry, one more sleepless night spent arranging your fears into something that sounded like wisdom. It was not that clarity had not arrived. Clarity has been arriving. Repeatedly. The issue is not that truth failed to speak. The issue is that you kept finding sophisticated ways not to answer it. That is what people rarely say out loud. Delay is often built out of narrative, a private narrative, a well-rehearsed inner script, a sequence of explanations so familiar they begin to feel like fact. And because they sound reasonable, you stop questioning them. You stop hearing the tremor underneath them. You stop noticing that what once may have been discernment has quietly hardened into avoidance. You called it patience. But patience, when it is alive, has movement in it. It breathes. It ripens. It knows when to wait, and when waiting has become decay. What many people call patience is not patience at all. It is fear with good posture. It is postponement wearing a calm face. It is the desire to avoid disruption wrapped in the language of timing. And timing, too, can become a hiding place. You told yourself you were protecting the peace. But peace that demands the burial of truth is not peace. It is containment. It is managed tension. It is silence with a heartbeat inside it. And that heartbeat does not remain quiet forever. It grows louder. It begins to tap from behind the walls. It shows up in the body, in the breath, in the fatigue, in the resentment you cannot fully justify, in the sudden ache that arrives when you imagine continuing exactly as you are. So, no, this moment does not honor those stories. Mars on the North Node is not sentimental about your negotiations with yourself. It is not interested in the bargains you made at 2 in the morning when you were exhausted enough to confuse delay with mercy. It does not bow to the small contracts you signed internally later, soon. After this, once things settle, once they understand, once I feel stronger, once the timing looks cleaner, once I stop being afraid. Those contracts may have kept you functional for a while. They may even have kept your world intact. But this is the kind of hour that tests whether the structure you preserved is still capable of holding your actual life. Because this kind of alignment behaves like a forge, and a forge is never interested in your performance, it is interested in your substance. Once metal enters fire, everything false around it becomes obvious. Paint blisters. Moisture burns off. Surface residue cannot survive the heat. Only the real material remains. Only what can withstand transformation is allowed to stay in the process. That is what this pressure does. It strips away the decorative explanations. It burns through the language you used to keep yourself comfortable. It reveals whether the reason you delayed was truly complexity, or whether complexity became a shield for the simpler, harder truth. You did not want the consequences of acting. That is why eventually has no authority here. Eventually is one of the most dangerous words in the spiritual life. Eventually sounds mature. It sounds non-reactive. It sounds like someone who is taking things seriously, but eventually has swallowed whole years of people's lives. Eventually is where desire goes to thin out. Eventually is where clarity gets slowly starved by repetition. Eventually is where the soul goes unheard while the personality keeps making beautiful speeches about process. The forge does not recognize eventually. It recognizes temperature. It recognizes readiness. It recognizes whether the metal is in the fire now. And now is what this window is built around. But this is also where Pisces changes everything. Because if this were only Mars in a harder sign, the message would be blunt. Push through. Attack the obstacle. Force the issue. Move. But Mars in Pisces does not work like that. Pisces does not ask only what must be done. It asks what must be surrendered for the right thing to live. And that is a far more demanding question. Action is sometimes easier than release. Conflict is sometimes easier than grief. Declaring war can be easier than admitting something has quietly ended. Pisces does not always hand you a wall to break through. Sometimes it hands you a bond to dissolve, a story to outgrow, an image of yourself to stop feeding, a loyalty that has expired but still knows how to make you feel guilty when you look away. So the question becomes subtler and more difficult. Not, what are you ready to conquer? But, what are you ready to stop carrying? What are you ready to put down so that life can redirect its energy toward what is still alive? Think of late winter turning into early spring. Anyone who has worked with real soil knows there is a season when tenderness is not the same thing as passivity. There is a season when care requires a blade. Before the first honest growth of a new cycle can emerge, something dead must be removed. Not violently, not in rage, not with self-righteousness. Cleanly, deliberately, with precision, and sometimes with sorrow. Because not everything that must be cut was always lifeless. Some of it once bloomed. Some of it once sheltered you. Some of it once felt like proof that your life was working. That is why release can hurt without being wrong. A dead branch does not remain neutral on a living tree. It does not simply sit there, harmless, preserved by nostalgia. It draws resources. It takes light, water, strength. It occupies structure. The longer it remains attached, the more it weakens the whole organism. The tree cannot become what the next season is asking of it, while it is still financing what has already ended. And this is where the message gets personal. You have a branch like that, maybe several. But one in particular has been calling for your attention for a long time now. The moment I say it, some part of you recognizes it, not intellectually, somatically, immediately. A relationship that has been extracting more life than it gives back. A role you keep performing because others are accustomed to your costume. a version of yourself that was once necessary, once brilliant even, but is no longer true and has not been true for years. A loyalty built around survival that cannot accompany you into wholeness. A pattern that still knows how to earn applause, even while it quietly starves your future. That is the branch. Mars brings the cutting force. Pisces reveals where the life has already withdrawn. The node makes clear that continuation carries a cost, and the cost is not abstract. The cost is next season itself. Because the tree does not negotiate with deadwood forever. At a certain point, its next form depends on removal, not punishment, not drama, not revenge, just the sober intelligence of growth, the willingness to stop feeding what no longer belongs to the living architecture of your life. This is what tomorrow intensifies, not random destruction, not impulsive severing, a clean recognition, the understanding that some things in your life are not evil, only over, not hateful, only complete, not to be ripped away in contempt, but released with enough honesty that what is still alive can finally receive full nourishment. So if the pressure feels sharp, it is because the season has changed. And if the choice feels irreversible, it is because part of you already knows the truth. The life that is trying to emerge in you cannot keep paying to preserve what has already expired. That is the real blade in this transit. Not aggression, not drama, discernment with consequence. And once you see the branch clearly, the question is no longer whether the cut is necessary. The question is whether you are willing to make it before another cycle of your life is drained, trying to keep something dead attached to a living tree. Step back for a moment and look at the larger field, because this choice did not appear out of nowhere. It was prepared. 3 weeks ago, on February 20, Saturn and Neptune came together at 0 degrees, 45's Aries, the world point, the first degree, the place where cycles do not merely continue, but begin again, under different laws. This meeting comes only about every 36 years. The last time it arrived at this level of consequence was 1989, when structures cracked, borders shifted, and entire systems lost their claim to permanence. That is the backdrop to the pressure you feel now. Something in late February altered the architecture under your life. Not dramatically on the surface, maybe, but deeply, quietly, decisively. Saturn is structure, boundary, law, the framework that gives reality its edges. Neptune is dissolution, vision, the current that blurs what can no longer remain fixed. When they met at the first degree of Aries, the old floor did not collapse with a scream. It loosened underneath you. The rules you had been relying on began to lose authority. The map you had been using stopped matching the territory. You felt that, even if you never named it. That strange sensation that what used to work no longer carries the same power. That you were standing inside a life you recognized, but something fundamental had been rearranged while the lights were off. That is why tomorrow's decision feels disorienting. You are not choosing from stable, familiar ground. You are choosing on terrain that is still becoming itself. And that is exactly why it matters. The first decision, made on new ground, is never small. It becomes precedent. It becomes pattern. It tells the unseen structure beneath you what kind of life it is being asked to support. Now, let me bring this down from the cosmic to the personal, because where Pisces falls in your chart tells you where this pressure becomes real. If you are Pisces or Pisces rising, this lands in the first house, the house of selfhood, identity, embodiment. This is not mainly about an outer circumstance. It is about who you are no longer willing to be. The self that carried you this far is being brought to the threshold, and what comes through next will feel sharper, cleaner, more honest, recognizable to your soul, but unfamiliar to those who only knew your old outline. If you are Virgo or Virgo rising, this falls in the 7th house. Partnership, bond, mirror, the sacred strain of two lives, trying to hold one truth. The question here is not simply whether love exists. The question is whether the structure between you can contain who you are becoming. This is where illusion burns off. What remains may be hard to face, but it will not be vague. If you are Gemini or Gemini rising, this strikes the 10th house work, calling, reputation, the public face of your life. Something in your professional identity is being tested in real time. The issue is no longer whether you can keep performing the role. The issue is whether the role still belongs to your actual future. If your visible path and your deeper assignment have split apart, this week will make that divide impossible to ignore. If you are Sagittarius or Sagittarius rising, this moves through the 4th house, home, roots, the emotional ground beneath everything else. This is a decision about belonging at the soul level, not where you stay, but where you are truly held. What you have called home and what has actually nourished you may no longer be the same thing, and this transit is done asking you to pretend otherwise. Here is how you meet this window. Not with theory, not with reflection alone, but with an act that gives the moment a body. 5 days, 5 movements. Follow them cleanly. On March 15 after dark, light 1 candle. Take a small piece of paper and wait until the flame steadies and your breathing drops. Then write 1 sentence only, beginning with, write the truest version. Fold the paper and place it beneath the candle. Let the flame burn for 7 minutes, then extinguish it. The choice has now entered matter. On March 14, keep it sealed in silence. Tell no one. Do not explain it, test it, soften it, or ask to be reassured. What is forming needs quiet, not commentary. On March 15, speak the sentence out loud when you are alone. Not under your breath, in your full voice. Let your own ears hear what your life has been refusing to say. Pay attention to what shifts in your body when the words leave you. Then, on March 16 and 17, do not force anything. Watch. Stay alert. Notice what answers you without being chased. A message, a closing, an opening, a rearrangement, 1 candle, 1 sentence, 1 silence, 1 voice. Then, the watching. Before you enter that ritual, understand what is truly at stake here. This moment is not confined to your private life. A real decision never ends where it begins. When something is struck cleanly at the center of a life, the sound travels. It moves through relationships, through memory, through the unseen architecture connecting your courage to someone else's permission to begin. What you choose in this window will not stop at your own edge. It will reach the people who have been waiting consciously or not for proof that honesty is still possible. Maybe it reaches the friend who needs to watch one person stop betraying themselves. Maybe it reaches the hidden part of you that has been standing in the dark for years, arms crossed, waiting to see whether this time you mean it. Because the truth is, you are not afraid of the decision itself. You are afraid of the self that will exist after it, the self who can no longer hide inside the old explanations, the self who cannot keep calling fear wisdom just because it learned how to speak softly. That is why this moment is so exact. The question is not whether you feel ready. Readiness is overrated. The real question is whether you are willing to be honest. That is the only offering this threshold accepts. So, if something in you has been reached by this, let it move all the way through. Leave your decision below, not the polished version, the living one, the one that altered your breathing when you finally wrote it. Let your words become a witness for the next person still standing in the cold, wondering whether the fire can return. Stay close. The sky is not finished. Another threshold is already heating, and when the next strike comes, you will want to meet it awake. The message has been delivered. What happens now depends on your hand.